Imagine, if you will, the fertile plains of the Ganges River basin in the 5th century BCE. This is an era of immense upheaval in ancient India. Iron tools are clearing the ancient imposing forests, bringing rapid urbanization, trade, and the rise of powerful new republics and kingdoms like Magadha and Kosala. With this sweeping social change comes a profound psychological crisis. For centuries, the Vedic religion, dominated by the Brahmin priestly class, has held sway. It is a system built on complex, expensive rituals, animal sacrifice, and rigid social hierarchies designed to maintain cosmic order. The newly emerging Upanishadic texts postulate a universal soul, the Brahman, and an individual, eternal soul, the Atman. But a growing movement of radical thinkers is beginning to question this orthodox static worldview entirely. They are the Shramanas, the strivers, the wanderers, the ascetics. They abandon their homes, their newly minted wealth, and their social status to retreat into the forests. They debate, they meditate, and they experiment with the limits of the human body, seeking answers to the most fundamental of existential questions. Why do we suffer? Is there truly an eternal soul? How do we break free from samsara, the seemingly endless, agonizing cycle of birth, death, and rebirth driven by karma? It is into this world of intense intellectual ferment and desperate spiritual hunger that a child is born. A child who will not just join the Shramana movement, but will ultimately deconstruct and redefine it, forging a path that will spread across mountains, oceans, and millennia. History and myth are often inseparable in the ancient world, but beneath the layers of centuries of hagiography lies a historical figure, Siddhartha Gautama. He is born in the town of Lumbini, in present-day Nepal, to the Shakya clan. His father, Suddhodana, is not a king in the medieval European sense, but an oligarchic leader, a chieftain of the Shakya Republic. The legends say that upon Siddhartha's birth, his mother, Queen Maya, dreams of a white elephant entering her side. Shortly after, a revered seer named Asita examines the child and makes a prophecy. This boy possesses the 32 marks of a great man. He will become either a Chakravartin, a great world-conquering emperor, or a fully enlightened sage who will save humanity. Suddhodana, a practical ruler desiring a strong political heir, chooses the former. He determines that his son must never witness the miseries of the world, lest his mind turn toward philosophy and renunciation. And so, the gilded cage is built. Siddhartha grows up in the capital of Kapilavastu, surrounded by unimaginable calculated luxury. He is given 3 palaces, one for each season of the Indian year. He's married to the beautiful Yashodhara, and they have a son whom Siddhartha names Rahula, meaning fetter or bond. His days are filled with music, fine food, and pleasure. The old, the sick, and the dying are strictly forbidden from his sight. It is a world of perfect manufactured happiness. But a manufactured reality is incredibly fragile. Siddhartha is a man of profound intellect and restless curiosity. As he enters his late 20s, the walls of the palace begin to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a prison. He commands his charioteer, Channa, to take him outside the palace walls. What happens next is known in Buddhist tradition as the 4 sights. On his first excursion, Siddhartha sees an old man, frail, toothless, and bent. On his second, he sees a sick man, covered in disease and writhing in pain. On his third, he witnesses a corpse being carried to the cremation grounds, followed by weeping relatives. For the young prince, who has never known anything but youth, health, and vitality, the psychological shock is absolute. He realizes that his luxury is a fleeting illusion, a temporary reprieve from the inevitable decay of the human organism. He, his beautiful wife, his newborn son, they will all age, sicken, and die. But it is the 4th sight that offers a radical alternative. He sees a wandering Shramana, an ascetic with a shaved head and a begging bowl, serene and undisturbed by the chaos and tragedy of the world. In that moment, the trajectory of Siddhartha's life is irrevocably sealed. In the dead of night, Siddhartha leaves his sleeping wife and child. He trades his royal silk robes for the simple rags of a beggar, cuts his long hair with his sword, and walks into the vast Indian forest. He is 29 years old. This is the great renunciation. For the next 6 years, Siddhartha becomes a master of the ascetic arts. he seeks out the greatest spiritual teachers of his day. First, he studies under Alara Kalama, learning a state of deep meditation known as the sphere of nothingness. When he masters this, he realizes it is a temporary state, a mere suppression of mental activity, not an end to fundamental suffering. He moves on to Uddaka Ramaputta, mastering an even deeper trance, the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception. Again, upon waking from the trance, his ignorance and the latent tendencies towards suffering remain untouched. Determined to conquer the body through sheer, uncompromising willpower, Siddhartha joins 5 other ascetics and pushes the extreme shramana practices to their absolute limits. He holds his breath until the pain in his head is like a sword piercing his skull. He exposes himself to the scorching sun and freezing night air. He reduces his food intake to a single grain of rice or a single bean a day, or eats only moss and dung. The early texts describe him as so emaciated that his eyes sink into his skull like water in a deep well. When he touches his stomach, he can feel his spine. He pushes himself to the very brink of death. Yet, enlightenment eludes him. He realizes that starving the body does not illuminate the mind. It only weakens and clouds it. Mortification of the flesh is as much a dead end as the sensual indulgence of the palace. In a moment of profound clarity, Siddhartha remembers a day from his childhood. He had been sitting under a rose-apple tree watching his father plough a field. He remembered slipping into a state of natural, unforced concentration, a joyful and wholesome state of mind known as jhana. Perhaps, he thinks, that is the path to awakening. He accepts a bowl of rice milk from a village girl named Sujata. His 5 ascetic companions are disgusted by what they perceive as his catastrophic failure and gluttony. They abandon him. But Siddhartha is finally ready. He bathes in the Niranjana river, walks to a great Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, sits upon a cushion of kusha grass, and makes a universe-shaking vow. Let my skin, sinews, and bones dry up. Let my blood and flesh be exhausted, but I will not move from this seat until I have attained supreme enlightenment. What happens beneath the Bodhi tree is the turning point of human history in the East. As Siddhartha plunges into the depths of meditation, stabilizing his mind, he is confronted by Mara. In Buddhist cosmology, Mara is not exactly the devil in a Western sense. He is the personification of ego, desire, delusion, and death. Mara is the lord of samsara, the architect of the illusion that keeps beings trapped in the cycle of suffering. And Mara knows that if Siddhartha wakes up, his kingdom of illusion will shatter. First, Mara sends his daughters, Lust, Thirst, and Discontent, to seduce the prince. Siddhartha remains unmoved, seeing through the illusion of the flesh. Then Mara unleashes a terrifying army of demons, hurling flaming rocks, mountains, and weapons at the meditating figure. But as the weapons near Siddhartha, his aura of profound loving-kindness, or metta, transforms them into lotus petals that fall harmlessly to the ground. Finally, Mara challenges Siddhartha's very right to seek enlightenment. "Who is your witness?" the demon lord demands. "Who can testify to your countless lifetimes of accumulated merit to sit on the seat of awakening?" Siddhartha says nothing. He simply reaches down his right hand and touches the earth. This is the Bhumispasha Mudra, the earth-touching gesture. The earth itself roars in response. I bear witness. Mara vanishes. The illusions break. As the morning star rises, Siddhartha pierces the veil of reality. In the first watch of the night, he remembers all his past lives, seeing the endless chain of birth and death spanning eons. In the second watch, he gains the divine eye, observing the deaths and rebirths of all beings, seeing how karma, the strict law of cause and effect governed by intentional actions, dictates their fate. In the third watch, he discovers the ultimate mechanism of reality, pratitya samutpada, or dependent origination. This is a 12-link chain explaining exactly how suffering arises. It begins with fundamental ignorance, which leads to karmic formations, consciousness, the mind-body complex, the senses, contact, feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, birth, and finally, aging and death. Ignorance of this truth leads to craving. Craving leads to clinging. Clinging leads to suffering. By removing the ignorance, by seeing the utter emptiness of independent existence, the entire chain of suffering collapses. At the age of 35, as the sun rises over Bodh Gaya, Siddhartha Gautama ceases to be a seeker. He becomes the Buddha, the awakened one. For several weeks, the newly awakened Buddha hesitates in the bliss of liberation. The truth he has realized is incredibly subtle, going entirely against the grain of human instinct. People are deeply attached to their desires, their identities, and their sense of a permanent self. Will anyone understand? Legend states that the great god Brahma Sahampati descends from the heavens, kneels before the Buddha, and pleads with him to teach. Out of profound compassion, the Buddha agrees. He travels hundreds of miles to the deer park in Sarnath, near Varanasi, to find the 5 ascetics who had abandoned him. It is here he delivers his first discourse, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, setting the wheel of Dharma in motion. He bypasses complex metaphysics and lays out a profoundly pragmatic framework, the middle way and the 4 noble truths. He explains that the path to liberation is not found in the extremes of sensual indulgence or self-mortification, but in a middle way that tunes the mind like the strings of a lute. He then diagnoses the human predicament. First, the truth of dukkha, meaning dissatisfaction, dis-ease, friction, the fundamental unreliability of a changing world. Second, the origin of dukkha. This is trishna, or craving, the thirst for sensual pleasure, for existence, or for annihilation. We suffer because we cling to things that are impermanent. Third, the cessation of dukkha. This is nirvana. By completely uprooting craving and ignorance, the cycle of suffering ends. It is the blowing out of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. Fourth, the path to cessation. This is the Noble Eightfold Path. Right view, right resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. It is a system of ethical conduct, mental discipline, and liberating wisdom. Hearing this, one of the ascetics, Kondana, experiences a flash of insight. The first Buddhist monk is ordained, and the Sangha, the monastic community, is born. The 3 jewels of Buddhism are now complete: the Buddha, the teacher, the Dharma, the teaching, and the Sangha, the community. For 45 years, the Buddha walks the dusty roads of the Ganges basin. His ministry is radically egalitarian. He thoroughly rejects the Vedic caste system. A Brahmin and an untouchable are completely equal in the Sangha. He accepts kings and courtesans. Crucially, after years of pleading, he establishes an order of nuns, or bhikkhunis, declaring that women are equally capable of attaining ultimate enlightenment. The Sangha grows rapidly, governed by the Vinaya, a complex code of monastic rules designed to maintain harmony and ensure the monastics remain dependent on the lay community for alms. But the path is not without conflict. The Buddha's cousin, Devadatta, becomes jealous and attempts to schism the Sangha, even orchestrating assassination attempts against the Buddha. The events underscore the persistent presence of human frailty. Eventually, the laws of nature claim even an awakened one. At 80, the Buddha falls gravely ill after eating a meal offered by a blacksmith named Kunda. Lying on his right side in a grove of sal trees in Kushinagar, surrounded by weeping followers, he offers his final instructions. He refuses to appoint a human successor. Let the Dharma and the Vinaya I have taught be your teacher when I am gone. Be an island unto yourselves. His final words are a stark reminder. All conditioned things are subject to decay. Strive on with diligence. He enters a series of meditative absorptions and passes into parinirvana, the final nirvana, the total cessation of the aggregates, from which there is no rebirth. The man is gone, but the wheel is spinning faster than ever. To truly grasp the Buddha's authority as a spiritual physician, we must examine the precise anatomy of his most radical teaching. Anatman. If there is no eternal soul migrating from life to life, who exactly is suffering? Who generates karma? Who achieves nirvana? The Buddha answered this by deconstructing the human being into 5 skandhas, or heaps of clinging. What we casually call I or me is merely the temporary cooperation of these 5 shifting aggregates. Rupa, the physical body and the material elements of the universe. Vedana. The basic affective tone of any experience, whether it feels pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Samjna, the faculty that recognizes and labels objects. Samskara, volitional impulses, habits, emotions, and decisions. This is where intention lives. Vijnana, the basic awareness of an object, the knowing faculty. Imagine a chariot. If you take away the wheels, the axle, the carriage, and the yoke, where is the chariot? The chariot is just a convenient label for an assembly of parts. Similarly, the self is just a label for the interplay of these 5 skandhas. They arise and pass away millions of times a second. Because there is no permanent observer behind the machinery, no ghost in the machine, there is nothing permanent to protect, defend, or satisfy. Realizing this profoundly liberates the mind from ego-driven suffering. This brings us to karma. In Vedic India, karma was often viewed as a cosmic tally of deeds, dictating inescapable destiny. The Buddha radically redefined it as intention, or volition. Karma is not a cosmic judge. It is a natural law of psychological momentum. When a mental formation, the 4th skandha, is driven by the poisons of greed, hatred, or delusion, it leaves an energetic imprint on the stream of consciousness. It creates a habit. If you act with anger today, you water the seeds of anger, making it easier to be angry tomorrow. Upon death, this momentum of karmic seeds propels consciousness into a new physical form, much like a candle flame lighting another candle. The flame is not identical, but it is causally connected. Liberation, then, is the burning up of these karmic seeds so that the cycle of rebirth loses its fuel. Following the Buddha's death, the existential threat of losing his teachings looms large. 500 enlightened monks, or arhats, gather in the first Buddhist council. A master of discipline named Upali recites the Vinaya, or rules. Ananda, the Buddha's shadow for 25 years, recites the sutras, or discourses. Every recitation begins Evam mi suttam, which translates to, "Thus have I heard." This codifies the early canon. A century later, a second council highlights cracks in the Sangha, leading to early schisms. During this period of intense scholasticism, a third basket of teachings is compiled, the Abhidharma. If the sutras are practical teachings, the Abhidharma is the ultimate hyper-analytical map of the mind. Scholars deconstructed reality down to its absolute most basic, irreducible components, called dharmas. With a lowercase d, they categorized every type of consciousness and mental factor, mapping exactly how they interact from microsecond to microsecond. It is an ancient, staggering work of phenomenological psychology, arguing that true liberation requires observing the mind at this granular level until clinging becomes impossible. For its first few centuries, Buddhism remains a localized Indian movement. The destiny of the Dharma changes forever in the 3rd century BCE with the rise of the Mauryan emperor, Ashoka the Great. Following his brutal conquest of Kalinga, which left over 100,000 dead, Ashoka is struck by profound remorse. The absolute monarch of the Indian subcontinent converts to Buddhism. He embraces ahimsa, or non-violence, and transforms his empire into a welfare state. Ashoka erects massive stone pillars inscribed with ethical teachings and builds 84,000 stupas. Crucially, he sends official missionaries far beyond his borders, to Sri Lanka, to the Hellenistic Greek kingdoms of the Middle East, and to the Himalayas. He provides the state sponsorship necessary for Buddhism to become the first true world religion. Around the 1st century BCE, a quiet revolution begins. New texts appear, claiming to be the higher, deeper teachings of the Buddha. This incredibly diverse movement calls itself the Mahayana, the Great Vehicle. The Mahayana introduces a radical shift in the spiritual ideal. The earlier tradition focused on becoming an arhat, striving for personal liberation. The Mahayana argues this lacks ultimate compassion. They introduce the Bodhisattva, an awakened being who reaches the threshold of nirvana but turns back, vowing to remain in samsara until every sentient being is saved. With this comes a massive shift in philosophy, spearheaded by Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna systematizes the doctrine of shunyata, or emptiness. He argues that it is not just the self that is empty, but all phenomena. Because everything is empty of independent existence, everything is profoundly interconnected. Centuries later, the Yogacara school emerges, arguing that all reality is ultimately a projection of consciousness. Meanwhile, the older, more conservative tradition solidifies as Theravada, the way of the elders, thriving in Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, and preserving the rigorous Vipassana meditation of the early texts. As Theravada moves south, Mahayana travels north along the Silk Road, arriving in Han Dynasty China. This is a monumental clash of civilizations, India's abstract, world-renouncing philosophy versus China's practical, family-oriented Confucian culture. Early translators borrow heavily from Taoist vocabulary. Dharma becomes the Tao. Chinese monks synthesize the vast Mahayana sutras, creating distinctively Chinese schools. Pure Land Buddhism teaches that by reciting Amitabha Buddha's name with sincere faith, one is reborn in his Western Pure Land, democratizing salvation for the masses. The Chan school, brought by Bodhidharma, scoffs at heavy intellectualizing. It focuses purely on direct realization through uncompromising meditation. When Chan travels to Korea as Sion and Japan as Zen, it fundamentally shapes the culture, influencing everything from the tea ceremony to martial arts. While Buddhism adapts to China, a third major vehicle gestates in northern Indian universities, the Vajrayana, or diamond vehicle. Vajrayana introduces Tantra, esoteric practices utilizing mantras, mudras, and mandalas. It asserts that the passions are not to be suppressed, but transmuted into fuel for rapid awakening. Through deity yoga, a practitioner visualizes themselves as an enlightened Buddha to collapse the distinction between their ordinary mind and the awakened mind. In the 8th century, the tantric master Padmasambhava subdues the animist spirits of the Himalayas, establishing Buddhism in Tibet. Tibetan Buddhism evolves into a deeply rich tradition. To ensure stable leadership, Tibetans develop the Tulku system of reincarnate lamas, the most famous being the Dalai Lamas. By the 13th century, Buddhism was largely wiped out in India by a revitalized Hinduism and Islamic invasions. But the Dharma had already spanned the continent. In the 19th and 20th centuries, it would span the globe. Colonial expansion brought European scholars into contact with Buddhist texts. Philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer recognized profound parallels in the concept of dukkha. Early Western translations sparked a romanticized Buddhist modernism, popularizing it among American and European intellectuals. The 20th century saw authentic transmission. Following the Chinese invasion of Tibet in the 1950s, the Tibetan diaspora, led by the 14th Dalai Lama, brought Vajrayana to a global audience. Japanese Zen masters like D.T. Suzuki and Shunryu Suzuki migrated to America, heavily influencing the Beat generation, writers like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg, and Western counterculture. Simultaneously, Theravada masters taught Vipassana retreats to Westerners, founding the modern insight meditation movement. Today, a profound dialogue is unfolding between Buddhism and Western science. Neuroscientists attach fMRI scanners to meditating monks, mapping the physiological architecture of compassion and focus. They have empirically proven neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to structurally rewire itself based on experience, a concept the Buddha understood intuitively 2,500 years ago, when he said, "Whatever a monk keeps pursuing with his thinking and pondering, that becomes the inclination of his awareness." Furthermore, the engaged Buddhism movement, pioneered by figures like the late Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, has taken the Dharma off the meditation cushion and into the streets. It applies Buddhist principles of non-violence, mindfulness, and interconnectedness to modern social, political, and environmental crises, proving that inner peace and outer activism are two sides of the same coin. Today, Buddhism is not a single monolithic entity. It is a vast, dazzling tapestry. It is the Theravada monk walking silently on morning alms round. It is the Zen practitioner sitting completely still facing a blank wall, wrestling with an illogical koan. It is the Tibetan nomad spinning a prayer wheel at Mount Kailash. And it is the modern Westerner sitting on a cushion in a bustling metropolis, observing the rise and fall of their own breath. Yet despite this dizzying geographical, cultural, and philosophical diversity, if you trace the lineages back through the centuries of translation, the rise and fall of empires, and the millennia of human history, the thread remains completely unbroken. At its core, beneath the intricate tantric rituals, the vast Mahayana metaphysics, and the complex Abhidharma psychology, it remains the profound, earth-shaking discovery of a young prince who walked out of his gilded cage, sat beneath a tree, and woke up to the stark reality of the world. It is the understanding that suffering is an inherent part of conditioned existence. It is the realization that our desperate clinging to an illusion of a permanent self is the cause of our pain. And it is the supremely optimistic promise that through ethical living, the cultivation of profound compassion, and the rigorous training of the mind, we hold the key to our own ultimate liberation. The wheel set in motion 2,500 years ago continues to turn, offering a timeless path of profound peace in an ever-changing world.